Before we begin, we are getting very close here to 1 million subscribers. My birthday is on March 6th. I don't think we'll hit it by then, but maybe that month, maybe the month after, we can be close. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, consider doing so now. Hey guys, this is Justin. Hello and welcome to another video. So we've still got a little bit before the Bad Batch brings a little bit of life back into Star Wars. So we're continuing our hashtag AskX series. You've got a question you'd like to see me answer, leave it down below in the comments with the hashtag AskX. Today we're dealing with a question that admittedly I've talked about, scattered throughout videos. I may have even covered it 5 or so years ago, but it's probably time for a refresh. This comes from Daniel, who says, why did Palpatine abandon the droid army since it was so powerful? Then I'm not really sure what the second part of the question is asking. I believe he's referring to Lord Nyax, but we'll talk about the first part first of all. And in this answer, I'm going to try to mix canon and legends because I think both have some very similar aspects, but they each have their own little unique bits as well. So the first and arguably most important reason is that you need to consider how the Clone Wars actually worked. What were Palpatine's overall goals? One of his biggest ones was to create a situation of total war across the galaxy, and for that, he needed an enemy scary enough that citizens of the Republic would generally accept the degradation of their democracy and the rise of a totalitarian ruler, and that's exactly what happened. Palpatine took more and more power as the CIS gained more victories, even threatening the core worlds and Coruscant itself. The problem is, the CIS's droid army was the symbol of this violence and this tyranny, perhaps as best illustrated by their leader, the half-organic, half-droid General Grievous. This is best illustrated in the Revenge of the Sith novelization. Early on, there's lots of talk about how the galaxy, how the holonet sees the war, how the brave clones are cut down by, and I quote, remorselessly powerful destroyer droids in the halls of the Galactic Senate. How Grievous is an abomination of nature, a fusion of flesh and droid. Whole planets have burned at his command, his evil genius of the Confederacy, the architect of their victories. Interestingly, it wasn't only the droids who Palpatine purposely vilified during the Clone Wars. As Dooku notes in the same novelization, it's no accident that the primary powers of the Confederacy of Independent Systems were Nemoidians, Kakoan, Quarren and Aqualish, Moon and Gossam, Cymerthian, Korovian and Geonosian. At war's end, the aliens would be crushed, stripped of all they possessed. Their systems and wealth would be given to the hands of the only beings who could be trusted with them, humans. So I guess technically the Empire could have re-implemented or begun to use the droid army, but it would have been a pretty tough look considering they had just spent an entire bloody war fighting those droids, and it honestly could have sparked another rebellion. One thing I find really interesting in Star Wars canon in particular is the inclusion of various characters who are terrified of droids as a result of the Clone Wars, Din Djarin of course being one. That was the backstory for the Mos Eisley Cantina owner as well. So yeah, pretty interesting. But had droids been necessary, I think Palpatine would have overcome that hurdle. The thing is, they really weren't. First of all, the Empire was not fighting large-scale wars where they really needed just an unending supply of troops. The largest and most organized enemy they fought was the Rebellion, and they weren't really fighting them on the battlefield, throwing numbers at each other. Certainly, droids were used to help patrol the galaxy, and they would have helped augment the Stormtrooper Corps, but that takes us to our next point, and that is the politics of conscription. This is something covered quite well by the new canon novel Lost Stars, but we also see it in the new Thrawn novels, the Alphabet Squadron books, and more. But really Lost Stars, and the basic idea is that the best way to further Imperial ideals is through the military. We see that across the galaxy, the most influential people are putting their children in the military, and that it's also a sort of way of escape for even those who come from backwater or non-prosperous worlds. Once in the military, these young minds are fully subject to all of the Empire's propaganda and indoctrination, and I know I've mentioned a few times, I really think Lost Stars is the best exploration of this because you see these young recruits who are otherwise good people fully fall under the Empire's indoctrination and go very different ways. What's more, the military is a method of not only propagandizing the soldiers who are recruited, but also the planets in which they come from. Your sons and daughters are joining the Imperial military? Well, that's one more reason for you to support the cause, support the troops. The military also really serves as the pipeline through which power within the Empire is propagated as well. Yes, there were some civilian positions, but very few. And especially with the big Imperial families buying in, you're ensuring that all your elites are basically believing in the same thing. Immediately after the Clone Wars as well, I also don't think Palpatine wanted the new Empire to seem all-powerful. I don't think he wanted a ready-to-go fighting force like the droids would have offered. It's better to have the vague threat of an enemy so you can militarize. Now, the Tarkin Doctrine did come into play later, but as the Empire was building up, and the Revenge of the Sith cross-section actually mentioned this, it's helpful to have something you can point to say, hey, we need more money, we need more troops, we're the only thing keeping you guys alive right now. The Empire really doesn't need an army, they need a police force, but there was no other player of the Empire's size who they were butting up against. I think this is kind of something the Bad Batch is dealing with as well. We see how the clones who have not underwent full Imperial indoctrination are struggling and sometimes even refusing orders. I think Palpatine likes the idea of not only having a force which fully listened to his orders no matter how cruel, but which actually came from the ordinary population. Was this a mistake? I mean, potentially. How many times have we heard about Imperial ships leaving with entire forces to join the rebellion, or squads defecting? But I guess that could have happened either way. The last point, though, is especially relevant to Star Wars Legends, and that has to do with Palpatine's Force abilities. In Dark Empire especially, we see that Palpatine essentially takes direct control over his military forces, but more than that, he uses the Force to bolster them, to issue commands from afar. Even his so-called shadow droids have the brains of pilots within them so they can be subject to his influence. But that's on a grand scale. Even on a smaller scale, in Legends especially, Palpatine used the power of battle meditation, essentially using the Force to augment the power of your military. That's one of the reasons, according to the Thrawn trilogy, why the Battle of Endor fell apart so drastically as Palpatine died. The Force meditation wore off. There were also others in the fleet using it as well, but that's another story. And the units lost their cohesion, and some even lost their spine. Obviously, Force meditation doesn't work if you're dealing with droids, and if you're going even bigger scale and talking about the Dark Empire, yeah, you need an organic military. So those are the reasons that Palpatine did not use the droid army. Of course, the Empire did have droids within its military. There were droid starfighters, droid combat platforms like the Dark Trooper or the security droid, but generally they like to use living beings, and I hope this explains why. But that's just my thoughts. Let me know yours down below. If you got a video you'd like to see in the future, let me know with the hashtag AskEck. We're getting closer and closer to 1 million subscribers, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, consider doing now. See you soon. May the Force be with you.